most kids that commit crimes, they are stupid individuals purely by the virtue of the fact that they're young, they're easily influenced, they're often used by people. I mean, children, the younger that they are, the easier they are to influence. I mean, you see that in family law. You see that in some African countries where you have child soldiers. They are the most vicious combatants.
Welcome to Crime Scene Gold Coast with Guardian Criminal Law. My name's Mark Savic. I'm the principal of Guardian Criminal Law, and we'll be bringing you podcasts weekly. A variety of topics that can be very sensitive, so please be careful when you're listening, and if you need any assistance at all, we'll include a lifeline number at the bottom of the page. We really appreciate you subscribing and liking our podcast channel. You can listen to us across most social media platforms, Spotify, YouTube, TikTok, and you'll find us there. We look forward to bringing you many episodes in the future. Welcome to another episode of Crime Scene Gold Coast. I'm Mark Savic, principal of Guardian Criminal Law, bringing you Gold Coast Crime Scene podcast. Very happy to have Mr. Marcin Lazinski, barrister, as our guest today. We're going to be talking about youth crime and about drink driving in the state. Mr. Lazinski's had plenty of experience. Welcome to the podcast, mate.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you very much.
I must say, I'm extremely impressed. You've said my name very well. Trust me, I've been called a lot worse than that. So,
Was my pronunciation good?
Yeah, it was really good, actually. Yeah. So
no worries, mate.
But yeah, so look, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, as I said.
Thank you very much. Can you let people know what your journey into the law was like?
Yeah, so I'm originally actually from Poland, and I moved here with my parents when I was 11, and obviously went through high school here. I initially actually wanted to be.
So you arrived from Poland. You didn't know any English?
No, not a word. I mean, I think I said hello and picked up a couple of swear words as you do as kids, but that was pretty much it. I so went to school here locally on the Gold Coast, and went through the education system here. Obviously, then went to uni. Initially, actually, I never really wanted to go into law. I wanted to be a fighter pilot. So in high school, I picked all the science and mathematics subjects so I could easily get into ADFA and pursue that career. My grandfather was a pilot. He actually flew for the Polish UN mission in Africa for 20 years or so.
Wow.
So yeah, so he was mainly stationed in Sudan and Egypt and things like that. So I've always sort of enjoyed the idea of flying and wanted to pursue that. What happened was sort of towards the end of I think it was year 12. I had all the paperwork lined up, ready to go, and my mum found all the paperwork, and she said, "Oh, what are you doing? You're not going to the Air Force. We've put up with one pilot. We're not going to have another one." And I sort of did a deal with her. I said, "Look, I'll try something else. I'll try law, and if I like it, I'll stay in that. But if I don't, I'm going to go to the Air Force, and you're not going to say a thing about it." So, look, I went to law school, and before you know it, I was sort of doing that. So I finished my degree. I worked as a solicitor for a short period of time. I moved actually back to Poland for a few months. I worked for a couple of law firms over there. I wanted to sort of gain the international experience, and then decided that I wanted to go to the bar. So I moved back to Australia. I did the bar course pretty much straight away. And then I worked as a solicitor. I sort of couldn't work out whether I wanted to be here or Brisbane, so I sort of kept working as a solicitor for I think another 12 months or thereabouts, and then went to private practice. So that was 2012 now, so 11 years ago.
Wow. We were going to have a chat today about some youth crime.
Well, yes, it seems to be the hot topic at the moment for all the wrong reasons. And obviously, one of the issues we were going to talk about is cars. It seems to be one of the big targets, and also, of course, from that, there's all the criminal law that flows into the motor vehicle area. I particularly work in two areas, broadly speaking. So I practice both in crime and in civil. The civil area that I practice predominantly in is negligence, obviously personal injury, and part of that work obviously involves work with motor vehicles and accidents. So it's an area that I sort of routinely come across all sorts of things. In crime, of course, we put up with all sorts of different clients from all different walks of life, from white collar all the way down to kids. And kids these days seem to be at the forefront of all the media attention. I mean, it seems to be that every time there is some offending, it's tied to youth. Potentially that's all warranted. Although what we're experiencing at the moment is a fairly strong reaction from the local government, and I think perhaps there's certainly some suggestions that maybe there's a bit of an overreach or an overstep by the government. So obviously we're all aware of the recent changes brought in by the local government
to try to crack down on youth crime. And the statistics that I looked at this morning for 2020 through 2022 show a continuing decline in crime generally, but an overrepresentation of youth in certain areas.
And not just youth, certainly overrepresentation, but the overrepresentation is also throughout. I mean, if you look at, for instance, the Indigenous children population, I think last statistics I came across was that over 60% of youth in detention centres are Indigenous, yet they make up 1 or 1.5%
very
of the
small
population.
Yeah, very small percentage.
So you've got to be a little bit careful, because it's all well and good to come up with strong laws, but you've got to be careful that we don't disadvantage already disadvantaged portions of the population, but also that we don't sort of create a slippery slope. One of the issues that particularly concerned me is the fact that you've got areas of the new law that seek to override the Human Rights Act. I mean, to me, it's kind of nonsensical, isn't it? You've got human rights, which are the basic rights, yet you're legislating at state level, trying to override human rights. I mean, that's the whole point of it. You're supposed to have human rights so that government can't take them away, yet it's being legislated out for children. And already in Queensland, I mean, I think we've got a history of I think, perhaps laws that are quite tough. So for a long time, I mean, adults were the age at which a person became an adult was 17.
For purposes of going to jail, but not for purposes of anything else.
That's exactly right.
Isn't that amazing?
You certainly can't, you couldn't get buying grog when you're a 17-year-old.
No. You can't vote. You can't buy grog.
That's right.
But if you do something wrong, you go to big boys prison.
That's exactly right.
That's only about less than 10 years.
Look, I think I'm not going to put a time frame on it, but it was certainly less than 10 years. I think it was only about 5 years ago or thereabouts.
I remember that very well.
When I practiced at one of the very first cases, criminal case that I had was a 17-year-old girl who spent something like 4 weeks in an adult jail. I mean, this is the problem with it. Even she was a very bad criminal. To be honest, she was useless at it. She got caught every time she did something wrong. If you were giving her career advice, you'd say, look, go and don't be a criminal because you're bad at it.
I've given that advice many times.
You have to.
I've given that advice many times, mate. You've given this a real good go.
Yeah.
You've given it 10 years.
Yeah.
Like you and it doesn't go really well for you. Time for a career change.
Yes. There is no, there's no benefit in having a long criminal history. It's not like a long resume.
No,
it's not
right.
good. Okay,
No,
the short. If you want to be a good crook, you've got to have no criminal history
That's
or very
right.
short one.
That's right.
But
some of them deserve to be caught. I mean, I've recently been looking at a case that was fraught with risk, absolutely fraught with risk. High level offending, matters carrying
Children?
life. No, adults.
Adults,
but matters carrying life imprisonment.
Yes.
So very serious matters. Adults that are aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
And one of the parties communicating via telephone with a ex-partner's child who's a girl of 14 years of age. He'd had a falling out with the ex-partner and confiding in her about the operation that they were about to carry out. It's just mind-boggling at how stupid that some of the offending can be.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Look, I've and I won't identify. Obviously, I mean we can't.
No. But don't be shy to embellish the story.
No. But I've always found it funny when when you've sort of set up code words and things like that, and it's always quite funny when you read it back. Mind you, we're reading it in hindsight, but I still think. I do think it's quite funny. I remember I came across one case and there was a group of people talking about selling clothing by the pounds. Yes, look, that's you try to explain that to the jury, it's common sense is not always all that common, is it?
No, not at all. But going back to the youth,
yes.
I was thinking there was something that crossed my mind. I worked a lot with youth crime in North Queensland with Aboriginal youth when I was working for the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Legal Service.
Yes.
So they made up a regular part of our clientele. It was a very busy office and really wonderful clients. A lot of the clients in the more remote communities really need our assistance to traverse the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
And I was having clients on a regular basis that had no idea what the terms guilty or not guilty meant, and it had to be explained to them, and I remember when I first started representing some of these clients, I wasn't aware of that, and I'd be standing in court and the magistrate would ask, I'd say my client's ready to enter a plea, guilty or not guilty, and the client would look at me and say, what does that mean? So they really need the help. And then the youth were, a lot of the youth offenders, there was a culmination of factors leading to what I would term as subsistence offending. And they included lack of resources at home, little education for various different reasons, a poor diet, no exercise regime, all these things that are quite regular things in a lot of youth's lives, whether it be through organised sport through school or things that you do outside and parents sort of drive it. A lot of those things are non-existent. And what I was seeing was the youth coming together to support one another and just to subsist. And so the crime would often, this was a common pattern. There'd be 2 or 3 young people. They would access a home. Unfortunately, sometimes the occupants of the home would be in the home, would be asleep.
And we've all had those cases. Yeah.
Yes, and I've had those ones that have gone wrong and where youth have assaulted elderly people in their homes, and it's absolutely tragic. But they'd break into the home, and then, of course, they know exactly where the keys of the car that's sitting in the driveway are and the credit cards, usually sitting on the sideboard as you walk in or on the kitchen bench. We all seem to be pretty similar creatures of habit. And what struck me was that quite often the first thing they do when they go into the house is not go look for the keys, not go look for the wallet, go to the fridge. And if there's leftovers from the night before, they'll eat it there while they're in the home.
Yeah.
And then take the vehicle. And then the first port of call is usually petrol station.
Yep.
And they get a bit of fuel sometimes, cigarettes and snacks for the kids.
Yeah.
And then the next stop is a fast food place. So KFC or McDonald's or Hungry Jack's, one of those, and they get food for the whole family. And then it'll be the last stop's usually the grog shop, and they get some grog there. So it's all that under $100 transaction. Then they get together and they share those things and then pass the card and the keys on to another set of friends. And it's usually the second or third set of people that get caught. But it's just to subsist, just to get a few resources. It's not like it's a organised crime syndicate that's cutting up cars and making millions of dollars.
No, that's exactly right.
It's a different situation.
It's often, as you sort of alluded to, it's sort of opportunistic vending. It's not sophisticated. Sort of comes back to what we were talking about earlier. They're not going to make good crooks.
They're on CCTV every time they go and make the transaction.
No masks and things like that. No disguise. And quite often, I mean, the problem with it is it's also quite brazen offending quite often, which creates a problem, doesn't it? Because what do? Do we have a heavy-handed approach and risk, for instance, sending kids to jail only for them to become better crooks? Because, I mean, we all, I think, know that prisons are places where obviously there's some degree of education as to afforded by the adult prisoners to the younger crowd, and the risk is that if you sent a young person with relatively little criminal knowledge, they'll come out with far greater criminal knowledge, and that reduces the prospect of rehabilitation. There's also added risks, obviously, that if you send young people to jail, I mean, there's all sorts of personal risks to them. There's physical risks to them. There's mental risks to them. And I think you have to, we as a society have some duty of care, particularly to young people, and particularly under the age of 25, where, I mean, forget about what the 18-year-old age or 17 or whatever. I mean, fact is, I mean, the brain keeps developing all the way through to the age of 25, particularly in males. So, I mean, a 21-year-old person even is a young person, I think. But anyway, so do we have this heavy-handed approach, which, with respect, I think the government at the moment is doing, albeit I think it's more of a knee-jerk reaction. I think it's more of a political reaction. It's a political stunt, effectively, but it's a very real one because it's been passed.
That's right. That is right.
Or do we head down a more the sort of more motherly approach,
moderate approach?
Yeah, even to try to concentrate on reintegrating kids into society. But of course, that is fraught with problems too, because if you have kids that have difficult upbringings, that have difficult parents, I mean, I doubt that a lot of the kids that are stealing cars and joyriding, I mean, I don't think they're necessarily from the most affluent parts of the community. They're often people
usually not.
I mean, they don't get the supervision that they probably need to from their parents, and therefore, I mean, should the state be more protective? But then, of course, I mean, there's a limit to that as well. I mean, taxpayers are probably fed up with all of that. It's difficult. I mean, I guess this is why, to some extent, we don't envy politicians' roles, because it's actually difficult to strike a balance.
But what do you think about this for a start?
Tell me.
Do we give 16-year-olds the vote?
No. No.
Please explain.
Well, I mean,
why not? And I say that from the perspective of making the government listen to the issues, because they're reacting to adults' issues around youth committing crime. Why aren't they reacting to the needs of youth to prevent the crime?
Look, it's a twofold answer. The first one is I genuinely don't believe that voting should be compulsory for anyone, although that's a different topic altogether.
Yep.
So because of that, I mean, I don't think you should force anyone to vote. And by virtue of allowing 16-year-olds to vote at the same time you're actually forcing 16-year-olds to vote when they otherwise wouldn't have to. So that's one answer. But the second one is, I mean, for the love of God, I mean, remember the stuff that we used to get up to when we were 16, 17, 18? I mean, do you really want those people influencing how we run a country? I mean, to be honest, I mean, I think even 18 is probably a bit too young.
I don't know. I just I think that the input might facilitate a different approach from the politicians.
I look, that is a valid point. I think. I mean, yes, you're right.
What about allowing prisoners to vote?
I guess that's one of the freedoms that we're taking away. There's got to be some price for offending. So, well,
I believe this is still the case. Please assist me here. I haven't done a lot with youth for a while. And I'll explain the reason why I haven't done much with youth for quite some time. I was representing a lot of youth, and the court in general tries to be as lenient as possible. They try to look at full-time custody as being a last resort. And so we often find that with the youth, they're getting many more chances than, say, a mature adult person would receive. And there's good reason for that, because a lot of them are kids. So the law as it currently stands places criminal responsibility on an individual once they reach the age of 10 years of age.
Yes.
But there's an argument that can be made up until they're 14 years of age that they don't have the capacity, they didn't know right from wrong, and that they be treated like somebody that's a child, so under 10 years of age.
Yes.
So we have that door open to us.
Yes.
And I've been successful with that argument on quite a few occasions. And then I actually saw some police prosecution habits change in my area because I was making that argument. And they then incorporated a regular question in the process to make sure they covered that base. And it was about, do you know the difference between right and wrong? Do you know that what you did was wrong? Can you explain why you believe it was wrong? And they cover that base. But there's an opportunity to argue that.
Sure.
Once the child is over 14, then that opportunity's gone as well. And there's criminal liability that's placed on that child at 14 years of age, and they're expected to know right from wrong.
Yes.
Now, there could be exceptions to that where psychological reports will show a lack of capacity, and that diminished capacity can be taken into account.
Yes.
However, from 14, you have to face the music.
Yeah.
If you've got to face the music in a society when you're 14, shouldn't you have some rights that accompany that?
Look, shouldn't
you have the same rights as the person who's 18?
It's a very, very valid point, and admittedly, I mean, I must say, I hadn't thought about it before, but I mean, look, I think it's a compelling argument, but I still do think that, I mean, I try to look back at what we were doing at the age of 15, 16. I mean,
we were really, obviously good criminals.
Yeah. Would a 14, 15, 16-year-old really care about, who their politicians are?
If I reflected on myself at 16, say 16 or 17, I had the good fortune of going to Lake Illawarra High School down in Lake South on the shores of Lake Illawarra. Public school. When I was there, it was a big cohort there. I think it was about 1,500 students. So there was like 350 students in my year. And
it's a big school.
Yeah. And of those 350 students, I think there was only about 26 from memory that went through to year 11 and 12. Not highly unusual. We lived in an area that was predominantly heavy manufacturing, heavy industry. So it was quite normal for youth to leave in year 10 and then go straight into full-time work, usually as an apprentice and still living at home while they're getting paid little but learning a lot. And that was a regular thing. But year 11 and 12, there weren't that many of us. I had the good fortune of having some incredible teachers that were really inspirational and that thought that teaching you a little bit about social policy and politics was very important.
Yeah.
But I must say the result of it was pretty much a group of far right wing voters with the youth. I think that far left wing, far left wing sort of approach to it. And I think that came from the influence of the teachers, and the teaching us about the various revolutions around the world and those sort of things. So yeah, I would have been, a bit radical.
Yeah, well, that's right. And I guess that kind of comes back to my point that as a, let's say it's a 16-year-old or 17-year-old and 14, 15-year-old, you're quite easily influenced still. So you can be quite easily influenced by whoever it is that's supervising you, for instance. I mean, if you happen to have teachers that are probably more left, you're probably likely to very easily sway down that side, because I don't think you truly develop this kind of critical thinking that we do when we get a little bit older, because with experience, obviously with life experience, we start questioning things a little bit more. So I think that's one of the reasons, as I said, I think the age of 18 for voting is probably right. But I mean, could you extend it? Potentially. I think it's arguable. But I don't necessarily know that it would actually achieve really that much. It'd be interesting to see what the portion of the population actually is in those age brackets, because I mean, technically it could actually sway votes if you have compulsory voting a fair bit and you force all these kids to vote. But then you sort of got this compounding issue that all of a sudden, if those kids don't vote, then they're copping fines for not voting. And I think, with respect, I think it just creates more problems than what it's worth. But I do believe that kids should have a say in how kids are treated in society.
What about if you, sorry to throw these sort of things in.
Yeah.
What about if you had a compulsory core subject in every high school when the child's 15 that runs over a period of 12 months, and it's about society and politics, and it's developed so that it's an unbiased approach, and so that the person registering to vote at 16 needs to have completed that course? Because we let 50-year-old Scientologists vote. We let
that's
all
true.
sorts
sovereign
citizens. We saw one of those today.
Did you?
Yeah, in court, arguing, and as a result, and the magistrate was trying to get him on bail, and he just kept on saying, "I don't recognise you. You are my incarcerator. You are this, that." And so she's locked him away for months.
I was reading about someone just the other day, talking about some ship vessel that they embarked on, or something anyway. No offense, but I mean, I think it's just, the problem is you've got a legal system, whether you like it or not, it's going to control you, and no vessels or whatever it is that you describe yourself as is going to make any difference.
I know, but this is what's happening with the internet and crazy people.
Yeah.
They seize upon something and then off they go. So that was one area with youth crime that I thought, is interesting. So you were talking about a more sort of caring approach towards the youth.
Well, I think that's the other option. I'm not necessarily, to be honest, I don't know the right answer.
I agree. And what I was saying earlier about representing youth, and I sort of walked away from it, the problem that I had was you'd get a great outcome in court. So the young person would have an opportunity and not have anything recorded against their name, and it was explained to them by the court that they were cared for, yes, and that the sentence reflects the concern of the court, and some advice being given, and they go straight back into the same environment. So the environmental factors are not changing. So it's just so hard for the young person to change their behaviours, because they just go into the same environment with the lack of resources. And I've seen youth as young as 12 years of age engaging in selling their bodies because they've learnt from the environment they live in that it's of some value to certain types of men. And they'll go out and seek those men out. And then those men, who are very, very dubious to say the least, and dishonour themselves, will partake in a relationship, usually paid for, with the young person. And then I've seen situations like that where the older male, it's always a male, is then charged with rape.
Yes.
And I know it'll be delicate and this will upset a lot of people. A person, an older person. So I had a matter at one time where there was a 45-year-old fellow charged with the rape of a 12-year-old. And it was rape all day. It's whether she consents or not, it's
irrelevant.
Rape. It's absolutely irrelevant.
It's statutory.
Absolutely irrelevant. Unfortunately, the prosecution didn't realise that the witnesses that they were calling were all going to give conflicting evidence. So the victim said that the accused had dragged her up a set of stairs by her hair. One of the other witnesses for the victim, that was one of her friends, said that they walked up the stairs and they were holding hands. And then the third witness for the victim said that she walked up the stairs by herself, knocked on the door, and he let her in. So at the end of the day, the court was unable to make a decision because the words from the magistrate were that the waters had been that muddied that there's no way he could reach a decision of guilt. And the matter was dismissed. Very unfortunate. And that young person, the victim, she goes back into the same environment where mum and the third or fourth stepdad along the line are dealing drugs in the house, and they've got all sorts of dubious people coming in through the house. What sort of chance has she got?
Very little.
How do we help her? If you remove her from the parents, that becomes a problem.
That becomes a problem. And
then the media doesn't assist because they go, children are being taken off their parents. They're not saying a lovely young 12-year-old girl is being put into a safe environment because her parents are not feeding her, not providing her with resources, and she's living in a dangerous environment.
That's right.
So it just becomes another political issue.
Yes, it's difficult. And then, of course, when you put them into that type of environment where they don't have the protection of the parent that can care for them, I mean, all of a sudden you expose them to all sorts of problems. I mean, but you know what? Some of these questions and some of these problems that they probably don't have an answer to them. Not, we can try different options, and I think it's sometimes choosing between the lesser of often two evils. I mean, the situation that you just gave, I mean, it's an extremely type of sad situation where, it's obviously the outcome there was somewhat dictated by our standard of proof, which is very high. So it's, the question is not whether this man probably did it or even whether he's likely to have done it. It's the trier of fact would have to be satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that something happened, let's say, without getting into the other issues. And I mean, where you have conflicting versions, I mean, quite often it's impossible to be satisfied beyond reasonable doubt. And the product of that is sometimes, as happens, is that a guilty person walks free. So then you've got this issue, well, hold on, but do we change it? I mean, do we water down this standard of proof that we have? I don't think that's the right answer either.
No, I don't.
I think it's a great, the sort of example, it's come out of some US article that I think was referenced by some US judge that said, it's a greater evil, it's a greater evil for one innocent man to go to jail and 50 guilty to get off. And effectively, I think that's the problem. I mean, where we've got a criminal system that punishes people by taking a portion of their life away, we have to make sure that it's a high bar, it's a high threshold.
Yeah, I agree.
The product of that is, unfortunately, that sometimes guilty people get back out in society. But the only saving grace to that is that generally guilty people, I think, even if they go innocent once or twice, they seem to come back around. The truly guilty ones do. They'll end up, justice will eventually catch up with them at some point.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
They just become more brazen and they just keep doing what they've done. And so it will catch up. but coming back to, I think, the point that you were making, I mean, what do we do? I mean, this girl has gone back into this horrible environment that she's in. The reality is she'll probably grow up, sadly, with all sorts of problems, mental problems, potentially physical problems, and she'll hopefully at some point break out of that cycle often with the help of others. But if she doesn't, she'll be stuck in that, and she'll be caught up in that cycle of violence, and whether it be emotional or psychological. These are difficult issues. And
I see that there's usually an attempt to connect the parents with community supports in order to improve the environment at home. And I think that is an important factor. How do we improve the environment at home wholly, so that mum and dad are not dealing drugs, that they're working, and they're contributing, and they're engaged socially and economically appropriately in our communities. And so community services to come in and assist that process might be a good way of supporting the child. And I've seen that there are attempts to do that. But what I've also seen, and I'm not sure if it's so much like that here at the Gold Coast, but in other jurisdictions where I've worked, there's no shortage of community services, but there's a shortage of, or a lack of, cohesion between them. Some of them don't even know the others exist. And some of these organisations you can walk into, and so there'll be an organisation that's getting government grants for assisting youth to write job applications and assisting them with language literacy and numeracy. You can walk into some of these places and you've got 6 employees performing some sort of admin tasks and 0 clients. There's some problem between connecting the clients and then connecting the community services, so they're working together at all as well.
Look, it's probably something that I can't comment on, because the reality is I just don't know exactly what the services are, and quite often in this area, as you can imagine, we probably in criminal law, I mean, we deal with, particularly at the bar, we deal with a small section of that person's life. I suspect there probably is quite a lot of services, but I think it kind of misses. But also, it's all good having all these services, but it probably doesn't deal with the root problem, which often is drugs. I mean, you've even identified it, that almost always there's some level of drug involvement.
Drugs and alcohol.
Drugs and alcohol, yes. And, that's probably the issue that you've got to deal with, I think. And if you don't deal with that issue, which is very much a significant health problem.
So how about we deal with the drug issue by legalizing all drugs?
Well, it's
we just legalize all the drugs.
Legalize everything. Well,
everything, absolutely everything. Everything's legal.
Yeah.
You can go to your local dispensary where you can purchase whatever you like. It all comes with educational material that explains what you're doing. If you're found with drugs in the street and you look like you got a problem, that you have to attend upon a panel of people who are from community services to assist you. They've been doing this in Portugal for the last 25, 30 years.
It sounds, in some ways, it sounds great in theory, but the problem is...
had great results over there.
Well, but the problem is common sense is not common. I mean, before you know it, you'll have half the population, high as a kite.
Do you think so?
Yeah, absolutely.
Look at it now. So
it'll be like Woodstock in the in the 60s.
I don't know. Look,
I don't know, but
there's medicinal cannabis now available here in Australia. I know it's in Queensland, and I believe it's in New South Wales. The other states have different laws. Some laws are very relaxed around cannabis, such as in South Australia and the ACT. We've seen no incredible problem. We've seen no problem caused by the relaxing of rules and regulations,
but it's still regulated.
Around cannabis,
it is regulated. I mean, you can't just go to your local cannabis dispenser because you want to get high on the weekend and say, "Look, I want some medicinal cannabis." You've got to have a reason for it.
Absolutely, but you can do this by just getting online.
Can you?
Yes. So there's
thought,
medical organisations now that
Yeah.
arrange an appointment for you online with a medical practitioner who is licensed to dispense a cannabis.
But hold on, isn't that more the CBD oil type of stuff
No,
without
no,
THC? Okay.
no,
There you
full
go.
cannabis flower.
Yeah,
Okay.
Right.
And so you get online, you make an appointment to see a medical practitioner. I don't know what the checks and balances there are, but they probably want your Medicare card number and some other. You probably have. You've got to pay, and then there's a couple of things that are required. So you have to have a reason, and from my investigation, the reason can be as little as I'm not getting enough sleep,
Well,
so I need something to assist me for sleep. That's the reason.
They'll
all
be
right?
sleeping all day.
I've got a bad back and I'm in pain, and the cannabis relieves my pain. So the reasons don't have to be. The bar's pretty low, and there's no evidence required. It's just a discussion between you and the medical practitioner.
Look, I don't necessarily agree with this kind of lax approach to regulation of drugs. The problem is, as soon as you sort of start making exceptions to some of these rules, I mean, eventually what happens is the rule becomes the exception. I think medicinal cannabis certainly has a place to play in society for people that are use it for certain medical conditions. Because I mean, I think at the end of the day, people should have assistance to a wide array of analgesics, whether it be cannabis or endone or whatever, if they need it. But all of this has to be highly, I think, regulated. I think the risk is it's kind of like guns. I mean, it'd be like saying, well, let's regulate guns by giving everybody access to guns. I mean, we know that doesn't work.
I don't see that as being the same thing. Let me try to explain an observation that I have made myself, but I've also.
But before you do that, though, can I throw one more issue at you? Because we know, for instance, that, I mean, we're using cannabis, which is, let's say, I mean, some call it the devil's harvest, some call it a precursor, but we all know that out of all the drugs, I mean, it's not the Schedule 1 stuff, it's not the heavy stuff. I don't think you could safely allow people to use heroin or ice. It doesn't matter how you do it. They're just such highly addictive substances. And we've all seen what happens with people that use it for particularly long periods of time. It leads to all sorts of other problems, whether it be health problems, mental issues. So when you're telling me your view, and if we're talking about the legalization of all drugs, we'd have to be fair, and we'd have to consider all those other substances that are highly addictive and very damaging.
Look, I used to hold a similar view to you. And then my view changed over a period of time to where I thought, legalise all drugs, but not methamphetamine.
What about heroin?
Heroin I have got no problem with.
Highly addictive.
Highly addictive, but heroin is one of the drugs that has the least impact on the human body. So in terms of liver, organs, brain, heroin has zero impact. So the use of pure heroin doesn't lead to any issue other than addiction. There are a lot of people that use heroin on a regular basis who perform in our communities, and you wouldn't even know.
That may be so.
Yeah.
But isn't one of the problems with drugs, it's not the effects of the acute effects of the drugs, isn't one of the problems all the sort of inhibitions that it kind of creates? I mean, all of a sudden, before if you're under the influence trying to go about your daily life, I mean, some people may be able to do that, but some people will be. I mean, for instance, we know that sharing of needles is one of these issues that leads to other health problems. I mean,
that is correct. That is absolutely correct. So there's these peripheral issues, but if we just look at the drug itself,
but you can't just look at the drug itself.
I know you can't. And there's certain types of people that have certain types of characters, predispositions that will become addicted. They're people that'll drink 30 cups of coffee a day and screw their liver. I mean, these are people that will smoke 3 or 4 packets of cigarettes a day.
Can I just ask you this? I mean, because let me throw this at you. I mean, we as a society, we can do quite a lot of things. We can fly to the moon. We have before, and I hope none of the sovereign citizens try to challenge this, but we have. All right, it's a fact. But anyway, we can fly to the moon. We can build enormous bridges, ships. We can look like computers. I mean, AI, all sorts of stuff. Why can't we make something to sort of satisfy this kind of quest for increased endorphins or whatever it is that drugs often do? I mean, we all know that that's really what drugs, whether it be cocaine or ice or whatever, I mean, they make people feel good.
Yeah, I call that the upside.
Upside. Why can't we make something as society that is not harmful, that makes people feel good, that doesn't last, days or hours, that lasts just a short period of time? Why can't we make something that would assist people to feel better for a period of time that they could take legally, that doesn't have to be, produced, I don't know, in some shed somewhere, at the back of God knows where, or in, the Golden Triangle of Asia.
Yeah.
I mean, why can't we just make something that satisfies this natural quest? I mean, if we look at the drug industry in America, I mean, it is billions of dollars. And so it's that demand. So long as the demand is there, and it's not America, everywhere in the world, I mean, there's a demand there for recreational drugs. I know people take an issue with the word recreational drugs, but there is a lot of people in this world that take these drugs recreationally.
Yes.
That's the reality. They're dangerous, but they're dangerous quite often because of the rubbish that's also in them, because they're uncontrolled. I mean, why can't we tackle it by creating something that has a desired effect without the problems? I mean, shouldn't we be looking at that?
We have.
Well, what is it?
You're a dealer in it. What? The gym.
Well, that's exercise.
Exercise. Like, you and I are both there this morning.
Yeah.
And, and I know that you and I are both up very early. I mean, we're having a discussion at about 5:30 this morning.
I get up 4:55 every day.
Yeah. So I'm up very early as well. And we know that it's in our best interest to go to the gym in the morning, and the best interest of our families and the best interest of our colleagues and our employees, all of those people that benefit from that high that we get when we go to the gym and that confidence that we get when we go there.
Yes.
And if you keep on going, you progress and you feel healthier and your life's better.
Yeah.
Whereas with a lot of these drugs, if you start, you might feel good and have a good upside, but that then diminishes over time and you get in problems if you keep on going, as opposed to the gym.
Yeah.
So I think that all drugs can be problematic in that way. If you're habitually taking 4 Panadol a day, that's not right. That's problematic. And there are a lot of things.
You're not tackling the root cause of the problem, which is whatever's producing the pain.
But there are a majority of people, and so a majority of people who drink alcohol use it well as a tool, and so it will be to unwind, to feel a bit more relaxed, to reduce your inhibitions a little bit, maybe in an environment where you're dancing or those sort of places that could benefit from a little bit of
it's a social glue.
Yeah, and it can be quite a good tool in your arsenal of things at certain times.
Gives you a little bit of confidence. You may approach that girl after a couple of glasses that you otherwise wouldn't approach. And probably there's a lot of people in this world that, they've got families now because of a couple of glasses of wine at some dinner party somewhere.
Exactly. So there's that. Then there are people that just can't use it as a tool. The alcohol is something that's going to control them. And these are the same people that if you did deregulate, so you allowed legalization of all drugs, they may have some problem. It's my view that health and education need to be the primary focus to assist these people, not to overindulge. There's Professor Carl Hart. I think it's University of Chicago. He's a fully tenured professor, and he talks about all of these, what he calls, I think, champagne drugs, the drugs that people want to take. And as a result of listening to his lectures, I've changed my mind on the meth.
Okay.
I used to hold the same view as you. Heroin and meth, no. Right? After listening to him, totally changed my mind on it. So it's not something that I would look to take.
Yes.
But if somebody was in a situation where they were very tired, they needed to get something over the line, they wanted to achieve something, they needed that spark, having meth could actually improve that situation for them and everybody around them. That could improve the situation. Having meth 2 times a day, 3 times a day, not sleeping for 5 days, not being employed, that becomes a really big problem. That upside diminishes very quickly and it turns into something else because of the effect that it has on the body. So people need to understand that it's not something that you can do all the time. Some drugs are just not suitable to certain people.
I take it what you mean by meth, you're probably not, we're not necessarily talking about, because meth is a bit of a generic term, but really we're talking about, aren't we really then saying that some people that have some underlying conditions, for instance, that they probably would benefit from some sort of a stimulant to make them a little bit more. Coffee, perfect example. I've been sipping it throughout. So
they do it all the time. What's the clinical meth called? Dexamphetamine. So yes. Dexamphetamine, or something called Dexies, are prescribed by doctors on a regular basis. It's meth.
Yeah, it's a stimulant that picks you up. So, but then we sort of come back to the point that I was making earlier. Why can't we concentrate on tackling this issue by creating things that are safer, that are
I agree.
Replacement for those substances? I do not believe that with the sort of combined mental wealth of all the scientists, we can't create substances that can make people feel better for some period of time that will not have the type of negative effects that illicit substances do.
True. If you used pure heroin, that will give you an incredible result in both mental and physical pain relief and relaxation so that you can be free of any of those concerns for a short period of time. So it might be for a period of several hours. If you were to do that in a controlled environment with people around you that care for some relief like that, you're not going to wake up addicted. And
I was going to say that substances that aren't addictive, because that's an issue.
Yeah, there's some substances that aren't addictive. I think they talk about cocaine. If you've got a cocaine habit that's under 2.5 grams a week, that you can avoid physical addiction. So you could be having cocaine in small amounts socially, and particularly if it's a very pure substance, and have a very positive experience. So I think Carl Hart said that, if you're on holidays in Colombia, for a lousy $10, you can have probably one of the most meaningful interactions with the person you love than you'll have in the rest of your life.
I was going to say, in Colombia, you probably should, because you're getting it close to the source, aren't you?
The national product.
2.5 grams of Colombian cocaine would be probably equivalent of about 20.
Well, I don't know what you have seen in terms of purity, but this is an issue. I have seen as little as 8%, and the highest I've seen is like 87%, and I think that's pretty much
with
pure.
meth though, it's kind of the opposite.
Yes.
So I think from what I've seen is with cocaine, we're talking about sort of really about 1/5 is actually cocaine, but with methamphetamine, it's up in the sort of 80s and things like that.
That's right.
I've never really known why. I suspect it's because of the type of substance that it is being crystallized. You probably can't cut it. I don't know, to be honest, but I suspect it's probably that might be the reason for it with cocaine. Just put more white stuff, whatever it is, sugar or dextrose, whatever it is that they cut it with.
Yeah, there's a few things. I've spoken to some people involved in the industry, and I was so surprised at the things they do. With the cocaine to make it attractive to clients. Like they'll put a couple of drops of nail polish remover in, so that it gives it a fuely smell, which some users take it as being a good quality.
You know, the interesting thing is, if you look, I watched the National Geographic documentary about Colombian cocaine, and it's actually, I don't think it's actually white when it comes sort of from its sort of source.
And the paste comes out, it's a yellowy colour.
But you know, but obviously when you watch it, when you see it in movies and you see it and come across your brief of evidence, it's it's almost a perfectly white substance. Yep. But I think that's actually not what the intended what the intention is. Yeah, that's actually probably just lots of sugar.
That's right. And I think this is part of the problem is. Don't go buying drugs from the street. I mean, it's just it's fraught with danger.
Our advice to everyone obviously must be don't do it whatsoever. Go have a glass of champagne or two and ask that girl out for for a date. But
this is another issue that I think is a valid issue with regard to our drug laws, and that affect youth as well. They affect youth dramatically, and that is that. What other laws do we have that preclude you from putting something in your body, that stop you from putting something in your body? And so what the legislators have done is they've legislated to prevent a very personal thing, a decision that I believe individuals should be able to make for themselves. If they're appropriately educated, they have all of the information and the capacity to make an informed decision. And then the responsibility for policing that is put on the shoulders of the police. So the police now have a very personal task to perform that involves searching people physically and very intimately. My son and a friend, when they were 16, between 16 and 17, they went to a concert in Brisbane that was open for over 15-year-olds or something. It was a concert of young Australian musicians playing. And they were escorted from the concert across the road into a shed where 3 police officers made them strip down, totally naked, bend over, part their butt cheeks, cough, all of this ridiculous shit. And so then that creates a really bad relationship between our community and the police, and particularly youth and the police. And I remember being brought up where we would at least once a year, a police officer would come to our school, and all the kids were excited about that in your class. And you were able to have a look at his handcuffs, and he'd tell you about how they look after the community. And if you're in any trouble, you come to the police, and your parents would reinforce that. If you're in any trouble, you just look for a policeman and go to the policeman. That's changed. I don't know. I've asked my kids when the police came to the school for a visit. Never. And my oldest is 21. And now my oldest son, who I've always taught, and because of my experience has been predominantly, I really like the police that I deal with, predominantly, who are honest, community-minded, hard-working people, and together we try to get good results at the end of the day. But it creates a really big issue for them, both having to be that personal and for the youth. And I think now there's a lot of youth that don't see the police as their friends and protectors, even though they'll call the police if they're in trouble, but they don't see them as that.
Yeah.
And I think that our drug laws feed into that, and our drug laws can create a lot of that animosity. You know, I mean, if you've got something that you want to take or you want to do to your body that's a personal matter, I'm not sure how you can justify interfering in that. If it's a personal matter, it's not leading to harm in the community or your family.
Well, I guess the contrary view is that this is leading to harm, and that's in the community, and this is that balance that we were talking about. So with everything, there is this balance. I mean, there's a balance between personal freedoms, and then there's the balance against the state interfering in those personal freedoms.
Yep.
Trying to strike that balance is probably one of the most difficult things.
Well, let's have a look at our cases that we do.
Okay.
Right. So if we have a look at cases involving cannabis.
Yes.
I don't have any cases involving cannabis where somebody was stoned and bashed somebody. No. I just don't have them.
No.
My cases involving cannabis are because you had cannabis or you took cannabis.
True.
All right? They're not because you went and raped somebody while you were stoned.
It's not even that you took cannabis, it's that you have cannabis in order to take it, or you have cannabis in order to give it to someone else, or you've sold it to someone else. You either had it on you because you were going to smoke it, or you had it on you because you were going to give it to someone else, or you had sold it to someone. Really, that's what it comes down to.
Basically,
you're right. You're right. I can't think. I've never had anyone that's been stoned and
done a violent crime,
and participated in any violent crime. Correct. Yeah.
No.
At most, they've
driven their car, pulled over to the side of the road.
Yeah, and even then, it's I don't think I've ever had a situation where someone had caused an accident because they're under the influence of cannabis.
I have not.
I'm sure it's happened, but I've never had one. I mean, drink driving, heaps.
Absolutely, and some drink driving matters where people die.
Yes,
and so we see that, and also I've seen a big rise in the proportion of cases that I've got that have methamphetamine as an element, and methamphetamine can often be involved with very violent and heinous crimes.
Yes,
so there's a point that I think there's a very valid point that you have with regard to. Maybe you legalise cannabis, but you don't legalise methamphetamine.
So
I think you could.
I think with those hard drugs, I think what you need, if you really want to tackle the problem, I think you need to find a suitable alternative that's probably not going to be as good, but it's going to be affordable. It's going to be, let's say, not have the disastrous effects. Because I think the problem with meth is not the meth itself, it's the fact that it's just sort of leads into this out of control spiral. I mean, people just don't sleep for days and days.
That's right. They
just do things. I mean, they just do things that are just abnormal.
That's right.
Because of this, they're
in a psychosis.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard of people, chopping up their mates with, a chainsaw or an axe, because they haven't slept for 14 days. I mean, Jesus Christ, you know what it's like when you don't sleep for... We've all done an all-nighter at uni. I mean, you walk around the next day as a zombie. I mean...
I know.
Imagine doing that for, 14 days or whatever.
There was a case of a very, very sad case and, involving a young child. It could be triggering for people. So in Sydney, I think the child was 2 years of age and mother was on meth. Child died and was on the lounge room floor.
Care, I take it. Yeah, of course.
Child died, was on the lounge room floor. She was getting up a couple of times a day, stepping over the child to get to the front door to get more meth. So that is just unthinkable behaviour. And I'm sure that without the meth, that there'd be no chance.
Well, it probably wouldn't have happened.
Wouldn't have happened. That's right.
In the first place. And certainly that type of response, that mother's response, is completely unnatural. It goes against sort of any law of nature that we have. And this is the issue, isn't it? That, I mean, the problem is it's actually not the drugs itself that is the problem. It's what they cause people to do. They lose their inhibitions. They make horrible judgments. They do things that are that they wouldn't otherwise do.
That's right. They get into a state of psychosis where there's all sorts of hallucinations and voices and beliefs that they develop over a period of time, and then they act on them.
And from a criminal perspective, it's important to note that the voluntary intoxication, even if it causes a psychotic episode, that is not a valid defense. You can't say, look,
that's right,
I acted out of my mind when I did something that was criminal, if that intoxication and the effects of it were caused by voluntary ingestion of narcotics. You can't do that. So you're potentially stuck with the effects of your actions, the culpability, because of an altered state of mind, which came, sometimes days after you had a bender with your mates. It's some of those consequences can be very serious. So it's
consequences can be very serious, leading to one mate killing another mate sometimes.
yeah, and those things happen.
We're dealing with those things. We're dealing with those things as a reality in our practice, and the fallout for several families is just unthinkable.
But isn't this the irony of criminal law? I mean, when people think of criminal law, they think that, oh, look, it's just all criminals. And I mean, it's, criminal lawyers that just deal with criminals and criminals are bad and lock them away. The reality is that most criminals are, all of criminals are someone's relative. They're someone's father, brother, sister, mother, whatever, auntie, uncle. And they are often quite decent people, apart from this short transactions throughout their lives that quite often produce devastating results, whether it be for them or for other people, or there might be motivations. They'll do something for a period of time, like they might traffic drugs for a period of time because they're addicted to drugs, and that's the only way for them to feed the habit, or they do it because they want to better themselves in life. I mean, they're all the different kind of factors that play into this. I mean, not all criminals are, the worst of the worst pedophiles or the worst of the worst serial killers. I mean, those ones are actually somewhat rare. Truly bad people are actually rare.
On that point, so
do you agree with that?
I agree with that wholeheartedly. Like, I can only recall two of my clients since I've been practicing law that I would put in the category of being evil, like scary people to be around, totally without any empathy. There's something when you're looking into their eyes that's telling you that this person is extremely dangerous. And so I've only ever had two of those people, and I don't know how many clients I've had over the years, but plenty of them. And a majority of my clients, I'm happy to see them and say hello when I go past. And I think that they're safe people in the community. And like you said, there's been a set of circumstances come together to create some sort of behaviour, and it can often disappear and the person's reintegrated into the community. Fortunately, I've seen a lot of that. And a lot of people are open to having some assistance to do that.
Yeah, that's right, and it's usually a chapter in their lives that they've.
Can you think of any real evil ones you have represented?
I don't think so.
There you go. Well, you've represented many clients, and for you to answer that like that,
I don't
shows
think,
how rare it is.
Yes, I don't think so. Having said that, though, and just so it's clear for everyone, because there's always this misconception. People often will ask you, oh, how do you do your job? How do you represent all these people? The reality is that nobody actually ever comes into your office and says, hey, I did it. I'm this horrible person. I did exactly what they're alleging that I've done. But I want you to get me off. I mean, that just doesn't exist. Yeah. They paint the same story to you that they paint to everyone else. Your job is to put that to the side and kind of actually almost, you've obviously got to follow instructions and things like that, but you've got to look at the case objectively. You can't just be swayed by what your client says. You've got to follow the instructions, which is at times difficult because you've got to make sure that you get the instructions the right way. You don't ask too many questions sometimes until you know what the case against your client is, because our job is actually offered to not only to represent but also offer advice and things like that. We've obviously got various duties and different duties to the court, duties to the client, duties to the opponent, even there are obviously all these duties. But coming back to what I was saying, nobody comes into your office and says, hey, I did it, I'm a bad person, please get me off, I'll do anything. Okay, that just doesn't happen. So has there been situations where you've acted for people that you've achieved a favourable result for, but you think maybe they've been up to something?
Yep.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Would that make them truly evil? I don't think it's for us to judge. I think we are part of a system that kind of generally, in most cases, gets things right. It all kind of comes out through the wash, and I think often the truth comes out. I think truth is one of those natural fibers that flows through society. You can bend it, you can stretch it, you can pull it, you can compress it, you can do all sorts of things, but it's difficult to break the truth. Often there'll be things that will happen along the way that make truth kind of very difficult to actually displace. But often it's about trying to achieve, I think, the right result, which doesn't necessarily mean a complete resolution or completely what the client would have liked. I mean, everyone that's done something naughty would like to get off. I mean, that's the reality. Quite often it's managing expectations and actually achieving a favourable resolution for the client that hopefully everybody can live with. I haven't answered your question. The question is, have I acted for someone, or have I met people that are truly evil? Look, I probably have, but I don't necessarily know that I know that. And I think, look, in most cases, I mean, the people that we act for, they're not inherently evil. I mean, they're people that have strayed, that have erred, that have done things that they often will regret. Or they've also been people that have been wrongfully accused. I mean, there are people that have, I've had a number of clients that I'm confident that they didn't do what they're alleged to have done. And often we've been able to achieve the right result for them. But there are evil people out there. There's no doubt about that. But I just think that truly evil people actually represent a very small portion of society.
I agree.
And coming back to the topic that we start off with about kids, I'm sure there's evil kids because there's evil kids in society, but most kids that commit crimes, they are stupid individuals that are stupid because purely by the virtue of the fact that they're young, they're easily influenced, they're often used by people. I mean, children, the younger that they are, the easier they are to influence. I mean, you see that in family law. You see that in some African countries where you have child soldiers. They are the most vicious combatants. They will commit heinous crimes against.
I've represented one of those people, and it was a really sad case.
They, because kids often, the one thing that they don't have is they don't have this critical ability to critically think for themselves. They also don't understand the consequences of their actions. So, they'll do things without appreciating the consequences. And I think that's something that we develop physically until, we don't develop it until we're probably about 25 or thereabouts. Scientifically, as I said, the brain keeps growing. But also, it's experience. We hurt people, we learn from that, and then we learn not to do something. Kids that start off often as blank canvases, and if you get them too early, if you influence them too early, they can probably do all sorts of horrible things.
Yep, I've seen that.
To themselves, to others.
Yes.
In sexual cases, you see this. This is very sad. When you see children that are exploited, and they will do things that are extremely damaging to themselves. But that's because they've been influenced usually by adults that should have known better. Do you know what I mean? They'll do things. We've seen that happen. I mean, you get a child soldier, you teach him how to kill, he'll kill. He'll be very effective. He won't even think about it.
Yeah.
So we have to be a little bit cautious not to have this knee-jerk reactions and let's lock up all youth criminals in jail. We have to strike that balance, and that balance is difficult. And to be honest, I think by and large we get it right. I'm concerned about the latest laws because, as I said, we have this fairly new Human Rights Act. We should respect it. We shouldn't be legislating parts of it out just because it's popular to do so. We can't I think we got to be really careful before we do things like that. And I suspect that we got that wrong recently.
I'm going to leave it there. I think that's a good note to leave on.
Thank you.
I think that's an excellent note to leave on. Thank you very much. I've learned quite a bit and been challenged a bit. Thank you. That was great.
Cheers. Pleasure having you.
Thank you very much for listening to another episode of Crime Scene Gold Coast with Guardian Criminal Law. We're enjoying bringing you these podcasts on a weekly basis, and we look forward to bringing you many more. We've got a Patreon page where you can subscribe. That'll assist us in bringing you future episodes, and also any money raised through that goes towards a youth help program that we're running. We look forward to your company for many months to come. Thank you.